This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, our top stories. A murder investigation has been launched after a 13-year-old boy was stabbed to death at a house in the West Midlands. Sky News has seen satellite evidence that Israel could be establishing infrastructure in Gaza, signaling plans for a long-term military presence in the Strip. And Oasis have issued a warning against people reselling tickets for their reunion tour at higher prices. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Christina Patterson and political commentator Benedict Spence. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's take a quick look at what is on some of those front pages. While the eye leads on the increasing pressure on the government over rising energy bills. The weight loss drug Ozempic is on the front of the Times with new claims that it could curb the effects of getting old. The Express also reports on Ozempic, writing that it could be the secret to the fountain of youth. And the Telegraph leads on that research as well. The Daily Mail, meanwhile, reports that Princes William and Harry didn't exchange a word at a memorial service for their uncle. The Financial Times reports that Sotheby's sales have fallen as a chill hits the fine art market. The Mirror writes of football pundit Jermaine's battle to save his marriage. And with Oasis tickets coming out tomorrow morning, well, the Star looks at the band's reunion tour next year. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. Well, we are joined tonight by Christina Patterson and Benedict Spence. Thank you both so much for being with us. OK, let's take a look at the front page of the Times. And a story that we were mentioning has actually made the front pages of quite a few papers. You could see why. Weight loss drugs curb effects of getting old. It shows that Ozempic, which is used to lose weight, now also slows biological aging, but not due to the weight loss, from what I understand. It actually has its own properties. Christina, tell us more.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine there'll be anyone who doesn't want it once they've read it on all the front pages, and particularly in a week when Kamala Harris gave her first interview. The fact that it's a front page story on a number of front pages is quite astonishing. But you can sort of see why, because what they seem to have discovered is not that it's just good for weight loss and diabetes, and therefore heart disease and the conditions associated with being overweight, but also for a whole spectrum of diseases. And the basic principle is it counters inflammation, and inflammation in the body is one of the things that causes so many diseases. So, and then from that, of course, inflammation is one of the things that causes ageing, and those of us who are no longer 25 are quite, potentially interested in this idea. On the other hand, it has to be said that it can cause side effects, including nausea and vomiting, and is linked to a 9-fold increase of pancreatitis and a 4-fold increase in stomach paralysis. So there is a lot to, that's a slight deterrent, it has to be said. And it will be very interesting to see how this develops and whether, for example, they are able to formulate something that doesn't cause these awful side effects but does have the positive effects.
Benedict?
I mean, the first thing that we have to say is that clearly there are a lot of newspaper editors in the United Kingdom who are feeling the pinch of mortality. If this is actually the thing that they all think is the most important thing, yes, stick it on the front. The thing that sort of strikes me about this, Ozempic works. How it is, it's an appetite suppressant. That's literally what it does. It just makes you less hungry. So this isn't really any different from fasting, if we're being honest. What it does is it just gets the body into a state of autophagy. And when you have autophagy, that's how you get things like inflammation going down. It's also the only state at which the body starts producing new neurons. And when you have autophagy, the body stops splitting and reproducing its cells. It just repairs or expels the ones that are damaged. So I don't think there's any sort of great secret as to how this works, but I do suspect, I mean, this is always the case with any kind of medicine, is that there will be massive side effects. And we're talking here about things like pancreatitis or stomach conditions. I would not be at all surprised if further down the line, when people continue to use this as a substitute for discipline, not eating too much, not overeating, you see an increase in stomach cancers as a result of this. I mean, there is always a trade-off when it comes to these sorts of things. So yes, if that does happen, almost certainly we will see a lot of money going in to try to fix that. But the reality is, this is just an alternative, a replacement for people not overeating. And that ultimately is probably the best advice you can give to anybody who doesn't want to age, doesn't want to get things like high blood pressure or anything like that. Don't stuff yourself.
But the fasting and not overeating are slightly different. It's the fasting itself that gives all those benefits.
Oh, of course. It's not simply a question of a balanced diet or a modest diet, although that is a great place to start. But, you know, there are many benefits to not actually eating the recommended 2,500 calories or whatever it is over extended periods. But I'm not a doctor, so don't take my advice for it.
I suspect there'll be a lot of interest in these stories because, you know, it both makes you lose weight and stops you aging. So,
count me in.
Well, I think a lot of people might be saying that. Let's take a look at the Daily Telegraph now. Health-related, slightly different here. So, on the front page, minimum alcohol prices could be next, pubs warned. Christina, what are the details of this?
Well, count me out of this one. Well, actually, it's a very tentative story, and it's not really yet a story. I think somebody mooted in a meeting the possibility of introducing minimum alcohol, but I don't think there are clear plans to introduce this. There's already in Wales, I think, and Scotland, a minimum price per unit of alcohol, which I don't think has had an enormous effect on alcohol consumption in Scotland. I mean, you know, it is a significant issue. I absolutely adore a drink. I remember once a doctor wrote to my GP saying, Ms. Patterson is a heavy social drinker. And I thought, well, yes, that's exactly what I am. I'm certainly not an alcoholic, but I, you know, love a Negroni with friends. What could be nicer? But as the toll placed on our health as a nation through excess alcohol consumption is extremely high. So I personally do support measures taken by government, although it doesn't sound as if they are planning to make them. It ties
a little bit with the smoking plans that we heard. Benedict, what do you make of it?
I mean, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they were thinking about this. And the question then is this because there are people in the Labour government who are sort of ideologically driven about the need for a health kick? Or is it that they're trying to sort of throw up policies in the short term to distract from the fact that Sir Keir Starmer's just gone on television and said things are going to get very financially painful for everybody. But look, we're trying to take care of your health. So, you know, I suspect there's a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other there. But I think you're right to point out, Christina's right to point out, that this has been tried elsewhere, and it doesn't actually stop people with serious drinking problems from drinking, in much the same way that making drugs illegal doesn't stop heroin addicts from going out and trying to score. So if that's what this is really about, I don't think it is going to help. I think, again, it's going to be one of those things that leads to fewer people drinking in a social setting, which often is actually one of the best ways of regulating people's drinking or things like mental health. And it's also going to be another kick in the shins for the hospitality industry. I mean, there's no question about that. That's where most restaurants, most pubs make their money, is on the markup on alcohol. Well, if they're having to put minimum pricing on top of that, it's going to become prohibitively expensive. And then if you add to that the fact that apparently we're not going to be able to smoke in smoking areas for the outside, for the 2 weeks of the summer that it's actually nice in this country, you do begin to sit there and wonder, well, what's the point of the UK hospitality industry? It wasn't brilliant to begin with, and now it's just going to get a little bit more miserable.
Well, all of these are plans, so we'll see what actually comes to fruition. Let's take a look at the front page of The Guardian. Interesting on this one. Thames Water lobbied officials for higher bills. So Thames Water has lobbied the government to intervene with the regulator to allow it to charge far higher bills. What is their reasoning for that? I
mean, the reasoning, partly they're trying to find ways of not being nationalised, I think is the key thing. But I think they've realised far too late, I think everybody's realised far too late, that there are massive problems all across the water system in this country. And, you know, people talk about the sewage dumping. That's actually not the biggest problem. I know it catches attention, but actually the amount of water that our out-of-date system ends up just leaching into the ground is far more problematic and costs us a lot of money. But at the same time, lots and lots of proceeds, lots and lots of profits are being taken out of the system and paid to shareholders elsewhere. Too late in the day, companies have realised we possibly should have modernised the system a little bit more. So they are trying to say, please let us charge what would now be the market rate to allow us to do this ourselves, rather than take it into public ownership, which they do say correctly, to be fair, doing so would probably spook a lot of overseas investors at a time when Labour is also talking about upping things like capital gains tax. Whether or not the government is going to listen to companies that have allowed this to happen on their watch is another thing entirely, I think.
Because the situation now is so dire, Christina.
Well, I mean, I think the water systems in the water companies are an absolute disgrace, and the sewage, the endless flow of sewage, so that our waters are now amongst the filthiest in Europe and people literally can't swim in their local river or their sea, is like a metaphor, actually, for what's been happening, because the whole thing has been filthy and corrupt, and people have been massively overpaid. The salaries of the chief execs in the water industry and what shareholders have been creaming off when they should have been investing in the infrastructure is a total disgrace. So how they dare to have the cheek to suggest to the government that this might affect investment, if the businesses had behaved correctly in the first place, that's, you know, people invest when they think that you're going to make a good job of providing a public service, and the delivery has been absolutely hopeless. And with all the other increases in cost of living, if Londoners now have to pay significantly higher water bills, which it looks as if they will, that's really going to go down extremely badly.
Well, speaking of that, an increased cost of living, let's take a look at the front page of the Eye, and the headline there, Labour is not doing enough to help with energy bills. So they've had this poll that reveals that basically people fear not only looming tax rises, but feel that the government isn't doing enough. And all of this off the back of Keir Starmer saying it's going to be a very painful budget.
Yeah, it's not entirely the Labour government's fault. They've only been in power for just under 2 months, but I don't think it's going to fill people with enthusiasm when people have been made very aware of the vulnerability of the UK's energy market to global affairs, to then see things like their bills going up and if the pensioners' fuel allowance going up as well or being removed. That is going to be a real problem because, you know, people can see what's happening in Ukraine, for example, where the Ukrainians are going, OK, we're either going to invade Russia proper or you're going to let us fire missiles at Russia's oil infrastructure. Which is it going to be? They're not stupid. They realise this means that, as you know, energy bills always go up in the wintertime, but they're probably going to go up even higher than normal. The fact of the matter is the UK has not invested very sensibly in its energy infrastructure for decades. The current plans of the Labour government aren't going to come in for some time, but they're not particularly sensible either if we're being honest with ourselves in terms of actually getting people's bills down. So whilst I can't sit there and go, yes, this is Labour's fault, they've only, you know, very briefly got into power, I can understand why there isn't a lot of enthusiasm for people looking at the plan ahead and going, oh, yes, I'm happy to sit this out for 5 years. I think a lot of people will be thinking, I suspect it's going to get worse, and I don't really see what you're doing to alleviate the suffering that you're telling me is inevitable.
But also that said short-term for long-term gain.
But how short-term is short-term? He said he wanted 10 years, and I think a lot of people would say, well, we just had 14 years of whatever that was. So, you know, do we have to go on for another 10 years? I'm not sure.
Well, I think, sadly, we do, unless politicians start being honest with the public about what things cost and how they get paid for. And there was an enormous amount of profligacy with the Tories over the last 14 years. Obviously, austerity was a nightmare and has caused enormous ongoing problems. But Boris Johnson, you know, sprayed money around like there was no tomorrow. And you have to, you know, if we want Scandinavia, you pay Scandinavian tax. If you want Scandinavian levels of services, unfortunately, the view seems to be that we want Scandinavian levels of service and American levels of tax, and it doesn't work out.
You know what else you want, though? To drill for oil, like the Norwegians do, which we're not going to do.
Well,
that's just
yeah,
an aside.
that's drill, baby, drill. That's a whole other deal. But you know, it certainly hasn't been a very cheering week on the Labour front. I don't think anyone could say.
Christina, Benedict, stay with us. Coming up, the Mail has the headline, Raiders raving, following videos of the Deputy Prime Minister partying in Ibiza.
Well, I come from Ukraine, so the disaster of '86 directly impacted me, my friends, my students. They were drafted into the army, sent as bio-robots to Chernobyl back in '86 and '87, my children. So I really couldn't wait as a historian for the archives to start opening up to write the book on Chernobyl '86. That's what I did, and I thought that that was history. My book was history book. That was it. The story was over, and then came the all-out Russian aggression against Ukraine
2022.
in February of 22, and the Chernobyl story got reopened. And that's where my next book on Chernobyl under the Russian occupation, comes from. First of all, it was unthinkable, almost unimaginable. Why would you try to occupy the disaster zone, the nuclear disaster zone? But that's what happened on the first day of the all-out aggression against Ukraine on February 22nd, February 24th, 22nd. The Russians marched toward Kyiv. The idea was to finish the war in 3 days, maybe 2 weeks maximum. And they took over control over the area, the largest area of the biggest nuclear disaster in the world, which demonstrated to me, and that's what I'm writing about in the book, that the culture that produced Chernobyl of '86, recklessness, complete disregard to the human life, health, even of your own soldiers, something that was fully demonstrated in '86, it is still very much part of the Russian cultural, political cultural DNA. And we witnessed another Chernobyl, Chernobyl 2, with the possibility of the repetition of major disaster. First in Chernobyl, a few days later, Russians took over now with a major fight the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and it is still under occupation.
Is that the Zaporizhzhia one?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is Zaporizhzhia.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Christina Patterson and Benedict Spence. Okay, let's take a look now at the Daily Mail. It's Angela Rayner. Day after PM warned of painful times, there's a picture of Angela Rayner raving. Now, she's at a club called High in Ibiza. We've shown the video. I don't know whether we can actually bring up the video. But anyway, she's just dancing in a DJ booth. I know I'm meant to be impartial. I don't think it's that bad. What do you think?
I think it's great. I think, well done, Mail, for giving her such excellent PR. I think no one could see her dancing, having a lovely time on her holiday, looking fabulous, and think there was anything wrong with that at all.
What do you think? I mean, does it jar a little bit? Considering everything we've been talking about, the cost of living crisis, painful budget that's around the corner.
I think it's curious that the Daily Mirror ran an article about Michael Gove, I think earlier in the year, when he was spotted at a nightclub in Spain, one of the Spanish islands, saying Michael Gove parties whilst people's bills go up. So I do think that sometimes, depending on your view, I think we should all take the view that politicians are human beings and they do need breaks, unless you're Dominic Raab and, Afghanistan's caught fire, at which point you should probably cut short your holiday. But apart from that, they should probably be allowed to take breaks, have holidays, and that they're normal people like us. And actually, as long as she's not doing anything untoward, I think actually dancing in a nightclub is pretty standard behaviour for you know, all of, I mean, who among us has not
Great.
spent every summer dancing in a nightclub in a Spanish island? It's sort of a weekly pastime. Yeah, I think it's completely fine. I'm more inclined to vote for her as a...
I was snuggled up with a book on my holiday, but each to their own, and I think it's much more
That's
impressive.
a lie. I've seen you there with your whistle and the white
Christina.
gloves. I've seen it.
Anyway, from clubs to concerts, let's look at the Daily Star front page. Oasis can save the world. Now, interestingly, Oasis are in the headlines also because tickets go on sale tomorrow. On Saturday, some went on pre-sale. Prices already up, apparently, on some resale sites to £6,000.
I mean...
Quite a lot. But this particular story, Christina, what is it?
Well, I mean, it's been Oasis, since the announcement, it's been non-stop Oasis, hasn't it? It is a big deal. I mean, for people of my generation, it evokes that whole kind of New Labour period and, you know, sort of...
Yeah, but even then, we didn't think they could save the world, surely.
Well, I don't think anybody except whoever writes the headlines on the Daily
So the headline
Star
here
thinks
is
they
Oasis
save
could
the world.
end the war in Ukraine by playing a peace gig on the Russian border.
on the
I'm
Russian,
afraid...
I was going to say, which part of the border? I mean, you know, you never know which part of it's Russia or Ukraine.
Yeah, I
these
think
days,
this is
depending on
kind of...
who's...
This is sort of on the aliens about to save the world.
Eminem played Beirut during the middle of a civil war there. I mean, people have done strange things. I mean, this would be pretty strange, but, you know.
It's not. It's absolutely... It's not going to happen.
Go see Oasis in Moscow
Either of
once
you
in a
two
lifetime.
setting the alarm clock tomorrow to try to get tickets?
Probably not.
No, I do. I mean, I do like them, but I'm not going to be paying £6,000.
You see the amount of money that some of these bands, you know, how much was it that Taylor Swift was charging? You know, tickets would go for well over £1,000. That's not even on the resale market. I mean, I don't know where people get the money from this. I mean, we're all for music and all that, but my word, I thought there was a cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
But yeah, Oasis, big deal apparently.
But just to make it clear, the band have said that, you know, it could be that anyone that buys these resold tickets at these extraordinary prices might actually not be allowed in. So imagine paying £6,000 and then not being allowed into the concert hall. So that's
Then
the
they break
warning.
up after that gig. They have a fight on stage.
Or
Imagine
during
missing that.
it, yes.
Yeah, imagine that.
Anyway, one more story, front page of the Daily Telegraph. Italy plots tourist tax to fund the bin collection. Christina, you've just come back from a holiday in Italy, so did you pay this tourist tax for the bin collection?
Not knowingly, but,
Okay.
but bin tax does feature quite prominently in Italian life. But actually, the thing is that I think this tax is misused by, or the argument is that it's misused by a lot of Italian cities because, like, as in many places, the feeling is there aren't enough funds to cover local services. So what they do is they take the tax, usually just a few euros, but they are talking about it being up to 25 euros in some places, and might spend it on mending roads or whatever. And I do think if you are going to take a tax from tourists for a particular purpose, you should use it for that particular purpose. Yeah. And also, tourism is a huge industry in Italy, and it contributes an enormous amount to the economy.
Well, bin collection is quite an important thing. If you leave it out, you get boars going through it in certain parts.
You get boars very widely. And Rome is now, you know, they've got a massive problem with their rubbish in Rome, and indeed with wild boars and all kinds of things.
It is an extraordinary sum, though. It's 25 euros per night. I mean, let's say you're a family of four. That's literally 100 euros per night, depending on how long you stay there.
If I may, I think a lot of this is actually, increasingly, I think a lot of tourism in Italy, not just in Italy, in Greece as well, but partly because there's the sort of the lineage there with Italy. I think a lot of it is aimed not so much at people like us in Europe, it's aimed at people in the United States. And the sort of assumption there is that a lot of people in the United States have a lot more disposable income and are actually far more inclined to just pay large amounts because there is just the assumption that that is what things cost and that they're actually, I wouldn't say happy to sort of give back to their country, but that the assumption is they just get there and they go, oh, what's 25 euros? It doesn't really make much of a dent, whereas to us, our money doesn't quite go as far as theirs does.
Certainly not. But my understanding is that the 25 euros would only be at the poshest hotels, which, frankly, I would not be staying at. So I think it's probably only for a level of
Do you think
wealth.
it ties in with a lot of stories that we've been reading over the past few months about Southern Europe in general? You know, Barcelona had it either stopping Airbnb or just generally being a bit tired of what some have called an invasion of tourists they get every summer.
I think, I mean, a lot of these towns are not designed for this. I think it wasn't the mayor of Matera when it was given the sort of Europe's Capital of Culture award said, actually, no, we don't want an influx of people. There isn't the infrastructure to deal with this. But it's not just tourism. It's also, because there's been this hollowing out of industry and young people in lots of these places, the digital nomad schemes to try to get people, or the €1 houses to try to get people in, there is, I think, a sense in lots of places that the culture is dying a little bit because there are people coming from overseas who do have money, but they aren't quite, interacting with the places how the locals would do, and there's a sense of losing a bit of self. I know in Lisbon, for example, there's a lot of anger that Americans come, again, always Americans, they come, they enjoy all the perks of living in a cheaper place, but they don't really give back in the way that Lisboetas do.
Yeah. Benedict, Christina, thank you so much. Stay with us. We'll talk about it more at the top of the hour. Now, let's take a look at the weather. Well, the weekend will be largely warm, dry and sunny. However, a thundery breakdown is possible from Sunday, and next week looks more unsettled. Most places will start Saturday morning on a cool and dry note with some mist and fog patches. The far south of England will be a little bit cloudier and breezier with the chance of a few blustery showers. Things will soon warm up in the sunshine, although an onshore breeze will keep eastern coasts cooler. Brisk winds across southern parts of Britain will feed in more cloud, as well as a risk of showery rain and the odd rumble of thunder. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, a murder investigation is launched after a 13-year-old boy was stabbed to death at a house in the West Midlands.